The midnight bells of St. Magdalene's had never sounded so final. Sister Catherine Marie, or that's what they called her, pressed a trembling hand against the cold stone. Her bare feet made no sound on the ancient floors. For 7 years this convent had been her world, her penance, her prison. Prayer, devotion, obedience. A life she had chosen to wash away the sins of her father. But beneath the rough wool of her habit, a new life was growing. A secret that would burn her world to the ground. 3 months. That's how long she'd known. 3 months of blaming bad porridge for the morning sickness, of blaming late-night vigils for the bone-deep exhaustion. 3 months of ignoring the subtle changes in her own body. But you can't ignore a truth that's growing inside you. Not forever. Tonight, the thunder rolling across the Nebraska plains sounded like the voice of God himself, and it was a voice of judgment. She clutched the small bundle that was now her entire life, a worn Bible, a silver cross from her grandmother, and a letter. A letter from her sister Abigail, postmarked from a place she'd only ever read about, a place called Copper Ridge. She knew every word by heart, the part about the vast ranches, the kind people, the chance for a new beginning. Abigail had found refuge there after her own troubles back east. Maybe, just maybe, Catherine could too. The iron gates of the convent loomed ahead. For 7 years they had kept the world out. Tonight they were the bars of her cage, and she was about to slip through them. She was fleeing into a storm, into the unknown, with nothing but a desperate prayer and a secret that could get her killed. What she couldn't have known, what no one could have known, was that 200 miles west, a man named Jake Thornfield was staring at those same storm clouds. He was praying for rain to save his drought-stricken ranch. He thought he was praying for water. He had no idea he was praying for her. The storm wasn't just bringing rain, it was bringing a woman whose past would unravel everything he thought he knew about his world, and whose secret would decide if either of them would live to see the spring. Catherine Donnelly had walked into St. Magdalene's at 19, a girl running from a fire that had consumed her family. Her father, a Boston banker, a pillar of the Irish community, had been exposed. He wasn't helping immigrants. He was robbing them blind. The Donnelly name became a curse overnight. Betrayal, greed, shame. The convent was a place to hide, a place to scrub the stain away through prayer and silence. Mother Superior Agatha, a woman with eyes that saw everything and a heart as stern as the Nebraska winter, had seen the desperation in Catherine. She'd offered sanctuary. For 6 years, Catherine had been the perfect nun. She taught the local children their letters. She tended the gardens until her hands were calloused and her back ached. Her days were a rhythm of bells and chants, a routine so predictable it felt like peace. She had convinced herself this was her calling, that the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience were a shield. Then Father Miguel arrived. He wasn't like the old priests who smelled of dust and decay. Miguel Santos was from California, a man in his 30s with a fire in his sermons and a kindness in his eyes that felt dangerous. He spoke of God's love not as a distant threat, but as a warm, forgiving embrace. It was a language Catherine had forgotten she knew. She was assigned to help him organize the convent library. Hours spent together, surrounded by the scent of old paper and beeswax. Their talk started with theology, with the lives of saints and the meaning of Scripture, but soon it drifted. Miguel spoke of his childhood in a small mission town, of a violent father and a reason to seek peace in the cloth. Catherine, in turn, found herself speaking of a life before the scandal, of dreams of being a teacher, of having a family of her own. The change was a subtle poison, a hand that lingered too long when passing a book, eyes that met across the chapel and held for a heartbeat too many. They both knew the rules, they both knew the cost, and neither of them could stop it. The first kiss happened in the library in a shaft of golden afternoon light. They were reading from the Song of Solomon, and suddenly the ancient words felt urgent, personal. She looked up, and he was watching her with an expression that shattered her vows into 1,000 pieces. "We cannot," she whispered, even as her body betrayed her, leaning closer. "I know," he breathed, his voice thick with a need that mirrored her own. "But I cannot stop myself from loving you." Their affair was a thing of shadows. Stolen moments in the garden after dark, whispered words in the confession booth that were not confessions at all. They told themselves it was a test of faith, a trial they would overcome. But every secret meeting only twisted the knife deeper, binding them closer. For Catherine, who had known no man, it was an awakening. In Miguel's arms, she discovered a different kind of prayer, a spirituality of touch and breath that made her feel more alive than any hymn. Then came the reckoning, the missed cycle, the undeniable truth. When she told him, Miguel's first reaction was panic, quickly followed by a rush of frantic plans. He would leave the priesthood. They would marry. They would run away, start a new life where no one knew them. But Catherine saw the terror behind his brave words. The priesthood wasn't just his job. It was his soul. It was the core of his identity. If he abandoned it for her, for their child, the guilt would curdle into resentment. He would grow to hate her for the sacrifice, and she would grow to hate herself for asking it. She couldn't do that to him. She wouldn't. So she made a different choice, a choice that would save him, but condemn her to a life on the run. The night she left, she wrote him a letter. She told him she was disappearing, setting him free. She begged him not to follow, not to throw away his life for a love that was born in sin and could only end in ruin. She left the note on his desk in the library, next to a small wooden cross he had carved for her. Then she fled into the storm. Patience, the old convent mare, nickered softly as Catherine slipped into the stable. She stroked the animal's neck, a silent goodbye to the only friend she'd had in this place. The road to the train depot in Millfield was a river of mud. She had never been more than 5 miles from the convent in 7 years. She had never been truly alone. Now she was both. As the rain soaked her habit and plastered her dark hair to her scalp, she thought of Abigail's letters. Her sister worked as a seamstress in Copper Ridge, a town that needed a school teacher, a town where people didn't ask too many questions. If she could just get there, maybe, just maybe, she and her child could have a chance. 6 hours. She walked for 6 hours through the driving rain, the mud sucking at her ruined shoes. The station master in Millfield, a man named Thompson with kind eyes, took one look at her and ushered her into the warm waiting room. He didn't ask why a nun was traveling alone in the middle of a storm. He just gave her a cup of coffee and a thick wool blanket. "Train west don't come till morning, sister," he'd said. "You wait here." She spent the night staring into the dark, fighting waves of nausea and a fear so profound it was a physical pain. What if they'd already found her gone? What if Miguel ignored her letter and came after her? What if this was all a terrible, fatal mistake? When the train finally arrived, a great black beast hissing steam and cinders, she used the last of her money for a ticket to Denver. From there, she'd have to find work to earn the fare for the final leg of the journey. She had no plan, no friends, just a secret. As the train pulled away, she saw the convent's bell tower on the horizon, a black spire against the gray dawn. She was leaving behind the only safety she had known. But what she was heading toward was far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. The train car was a rolling box of stories, families seeking land, men seeking gold, women like her, fleeing something they couldn't name. She kept her head down, grateful that the black habit was like a wall, discouraging conversation. Somewhere between Nebraska and Colorado, with the cornfields giving way to the promise of mountains, she made a decision. Sister Catherine Marie was gone. She had died in the storm. From now on, she would be Catherine Donnelly, not a runaway nun, a widow. In Denver, the transformation began. She found a second-hand shop and bought a simple blue dress and a black shawl. She told the shopkeeper she was leaving the order to care for a sick relative, a lie that came surprisingly easy to her lips. The woman nodded, accepting the story without question. Standing in front of the shop's cracked mirror, Catherine barely recognized herself. The severe bun was gone, replaced by loose brown curls. Her face, usually pale from a life indoors, had a touch of color from the journey. She looked younger, softer. She looked like a stranger. She found work as a seamstress, a skill learned mending vestments in the convent. The pay was next to nothing, but it was enough for a room in a boarding house and a little saved each week for the ticket to Copper Ridge. The other women in the shop accepted her story. She was a widow, her husband, a good man, killed in an accident back east. She bought a simple gold band and wore it on her finger, a circle of metal representing a man who never existed. The lie was a constant weight on her conscience, but it was a necessary shield. Her child, this innocent life growing inside her, deserved better than the stigma of being a bastard. A dead father was a tragedy. An absent one was a disgrace. In the harsh world of the frontier, a disgrace could be a death sentence. After 3 months in Denver, she had saved enough. She wrote to Abigail another careful lie. She was leaving the convent, she explained, because their elderly Aunt Millicent had passed away, and the experience had made her reconsider her vocation. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was close enough. Abigail's reply was filled with excitement. A new life was waiting. The final train ride took her through a country more beautiful and terrifying than anything she had ever seen. Rolling hills stretched to mountains that clawed at the sky. This was a land of cattle and cowboys, a place where your nearest neighbor could be a day's ride away, a place where secrets could be kept, or so she hoped. As the train chugged into the valley, she saw it. Copper Ridge, a single dusty main street lined with raw wooden buildings. Smoke curled from a dozen chimneys. It was rough, new, and alive. Somewhere in that town, Abigail was waiting. And somewhere in that town, a new set of lies was about to begin. But Catherine couldn't know that the lies she was about to tell were nothing compared to the ones that were already waiting for her in Copper Ridge. The town itself was built on a secret, a dark foundation that was about to crack wide open. Abigail was waiting on the platform, and she was not the timid girl Catherine remembered from Boston. The sister who had cowered before their father's rage was gone. In her place stood a woman with sun-weathered skin and hands that were strong and capable. Catherine! Her embrace was fierce, a little desperate. Then she pulled back, her eyes full of confusion. I hardly recognize you. Your letter. You said you were reconsidering your vocation, not that you'd left. The rehearsed lie felt like ash in Catherine's mouth. Mother Superior granted me a permanent leave after Aunt Millicent passed. I realized my place was no longer within the convent walls. Abigail's expression softened, but there was something in her eyes Catherine couldn't read. A flicker of, what? Relief? Or something else? Well, perhaps it's for the best. God works in mysterious ways. Come, let me show you what I've built. Copper Ridge was a whirlwind of noise and energy. Men on horseback, children chasing dogs, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer. It was a world away from the silent halls of St. Magdalene's. Abigail's seamstress shop was on the main street, with a small apartment upstairs. It was modest, but it was hers. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman commissioned this, Abigail said, pointing to a lavish silk gown. For her daughter's wedding, the Whitmans own the biggest ranch in the territory. Their word is law around here. There was a strange edge to her voice when she said it. As they climbed the stairs, the world suddenly tilted. Dizziness washed over Catherine, black spots dancing in her vision. The travel, the stress, the pregnancy. It all hit her at once. She grabbed the banister to steady herself. Catherine, what is it? Abigail's arm was around her in an instant. The journey, Catherine gasped, her mind racing. And the altitude. I haven't been well. Abigail's maternal instincts took over. She settled Catherine in a chair, fussing over her with tea and broth, chattering about the town. She spoke of the schoolhouse, of the teacher who was leaving in the spring. With your education, you'd be perfect for the position. The town council would hire you in a heartbeat. The idea was a spark of light, to teach again, to have meaningful work that could support her and her child. It felt like a gift. Perhaps in the spring, Catherine said carefully, after I've had time to settle. Spring. By spring, the baby would be born. By spring, her new identity as the grieving widow would be firmly established. It was a fragile plan, built on a foundation of sand, but it was the only one she had. In the days that followed, Abigail introduced her to the town. There was Dr. Samuel Morrison, a kind, elderly man who promised to look after her health. There was Mrs. Beatrice Fletcher, who ran the general store with a warm smile and an endless supply of town gossip. And there was Reverend Thomas Ashford, whose practical, community-focused faith was a balm to Catherine's wounded spirit. She started attending his Methodist services, finding comfort in the simple hymns and straightforward sermons. She kept her secrets locked tight, a Catholic runaway hiding amongst the Protestants, a fraud praying for a grace she didn't feel she deserved. As her 5th month approached, she knew she couldn't hide her condition any longer. The loose dresses Abigail sewed for her were no longer enough. She chose her moment carefully at a ladies' church gathering. With trembling hands and a voice thick with practiced grief, she told them her story. Her husband, James, a brave, good man, killed in a terrible accident just weeks after their wedding, leaving her pregnant, alone, with nothing but his memory. The reaction was everything she could have hoped for. The women of Copper Ridge, hardened by frontier life and all too familiar with loss, rallied around her. They didn't see a liar. They saw a sister in need. Mrs. Fletcher started a collection for baby clothes. Dr. Morrison confirmed the baby was healthy, due in late February or early March. For the first time since fleeing the convent, Catherine felt a flicker of hope. Her gamble might actually work. She was building a life on lies, yes, but the kindness it generated felt real. The community felt real. Maybe, just maybe, she could be safe here. Then December brought the first snow, and with it, a man who would change everything. He rode into town leading a delegation of cattlemen. The rustling problem had gotten worse, and they needed a plan. Catherine saw him from the window of Abigail's shop. He was tall and lean, a man carved from the unforgiving land itself. He moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of authority earned, not given. When he took off his hat, she saw dark hair touched with gray at the temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. "That's Jake Thornfield," Abigail murmured, her voice tight. "Owns the Thornfield spread out in Devil's Canyon. Lost his wife and son to fever a few years back. Hasn't been the same since. He's a hard man, Catherine. Best to keep your distance." But Catherine saw something else. She saw a grief that mirrored her own, a loneliness that felt familiar. At the town meeting, while other ranchers called for vigilante justice, Jake spoke of law and order. His voice was calm, reasoned, but carried an undercurrent of weariness. He was a man trying to build something civilized in a savage land. She found herself admiring his strength, his integrity. It was a dangerous admiration. She was a fraud, carrying another man's child. The last thing she needed was to feel anything for a grieving rancher with a reputation for being as hard as the winter ground. As he prepared to leave town, their eyes met across the muddy street. He touched the brim of his hat, a simple, polite gesture. But in that brief moment, Catherine felt seen, not as a nun, not as a widow, but as a woman. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The blizzard hit in January, a white fury that buried Copper Ridge in a tomb of snow. The world shrank to the four walls of the shop. On the third day, a frantic pounding shook their door. It was Tom Bradley, a homesteader from the edge of town, his face a mask of panic. "It's my wife, Sarah. The baby's coming early. Doc Morrison is snowed in, and something's wrong." Catherine's own child stirred inside her. She was 7 months along now, her body heavy with the life she was trying to protect. "What's wrong?" she asked, her convent medical training snapping to the forefront. "The pains, they're too fast, too strong. It ain't like with our first boy." Abigail hesitated, but Catherine didn't. "I'll come with you," she said, surprising even herself. "I assisted at the convent infirmary. I know what to look for." The ride to the Bradley homestead was a battle against the storm. The cabin was small, the air thick with fear. Sarah Bradley was exhausted, her labor not progressing. Catherine examined her, and her blood ran cold. The baby was breech, a dangerous, often fatal complication. For the next 6 hours, she worked. She drew on everything Sister Bonaventure had taught her, every technique, every prayer. She coached Sarah, guided her, her voice a calm anchor in the storm of pain. Abigail assisted, boiling water, comforting the Bradleys' terrified young son. When the baby, a healthy boy, finally drew his first screaming breath, the relief in the tiny cabin was overwhelming. Catherine had helped bring a life into the world, and in doing so, she had revealed a part of herself she was supposed to keep hidden. "How did you know what to do?" a weak Sarah asked later. I thought you were just a seamstress. The lie came easily. My aunt was a midwife. She taught me what she could. Another brick in the wall of her deception. But this brick was different. This one had saved a life. News of the widow's miracle spread through town as soon as the snows cleared. Dr. Morrison, deeply impressed, sought her out. You have a gift, my dear, a genuine aptitude. I could use an assistant. This territory is growing too fast for one old doctor. The offer was a lifeline and a trap. To work with the doctor would give her purpose, an income, a way to use her true skills. But it would also put her under a microscope. Every day would be a test, a risk of her story unraveling. Just as she was wrestling with this new complication, the rustling problem exploded. Jake Thornfield rode back into town, this time with 2 of his men wounded. The rustlers had gotten bold, attacking his herd in broad daylight. A gunfight had erupted. 2 thieves were dead, but the rest had escaped. Catherine found herself working alongside Jake in Dr. Morrison's office, helping treat the wounded men. Up close, his presence was even more powerful. His hands, scarred and calloused, were surprisingly gentle as he helped hold his injured foreman steady. He was calm in the crisis, anticipating the doctor's needs, his focus absolute. After the men were treated, Jake lingered. They're organized, he said to Dr. Morrison, his voice grim. They knew our routines, our patrols. Someone's feeding them information. Someone from in town. The idea of a traitor in their midst sent a chill through Catherine. Just as she was beginning to feel safe, the world reminded her that danger was everywhere. As Jake was leaving, he turned to her. His green eyes held a new respect. Mrs. Donnelly, Tom Bradley told me what you did during the blizzard. That was brave work. We need people like you out here. The simple, honest praise struck her harder than any sermon. He wasn't praising the fictional widow. He was praising her, her skill, her courage. For a moment, she felt the suffocating weight of her lies lift, and she could breathe. For the first time since leaving Miguel, she had been seen by a man for who she truly was, even if he didn't know it. And in that moment, she knew she was in trouble. Real trouble. Because how can you build a future with a man like Jake Thornfield when your entire life is a lie? A lie that was about to be tested in ways she could not possibly imagine. Because the traitor in Copper Ridge was just the beginning. The real secrets were buried much deeper, and they were about to be dug up. Her labor began at dawn, a quiet insistence that grew into a commanding rhythm. By noon, Dr. Morrison was hurrying her to his office. This little one's in a hurry to meet the world, he chuckled. Through the window, she could see the town moving on, oblivious. In a few hours, she would be holding Miguel's child, the living proof of a love that had cost her everything. But to the world, she was just another widow bringing her late husband's legacy into the light. The final moments were a blur of pain and effort, and then a cry, a raw, furious, beautiful cry that filled the room. A daughter, Dr. Morrison announced, placing the tiny perfect baby on her chest, and a strong one at that. Tears streamed down Catherine's face. The baby had dark hair, so much like Miguel's it was a physical ache, but her eyes, when they opened, seemed to look right into Catherine's soul. Hello, little one, she whispered. I'm your mama. What will you name her? Abigail asked, her own eyes glistening. Grace, Catherine said, the name coming to her in a rush of inspiration and prayer. Grace Elizabeth Donnelly. A name for a new beginning. A name for a child who would grow up knowing nothing of convents or forbidden love. The women of Copper Ridge descended with gifts and advice. Hand-knitted blankets, a carved wooden cradle, even a fine lace dress from the wealthy Mrs. Whitman. She'll be a beauty, Mrs. Whitman cooed. The young men will be lining up. Catherine smiled, but inside she prayed her daughter would grow up to value strength over beauty, independence over a husband's approval. But the fragile peace of new motherhood was shattered just 2 weeks later. The rustlers struck again, a coordinated, devastating attack on 3 ranches at once. Nearly 200 cattle vanished in a single night. Jake Thornfield rode into town the next morning, his face like a thundercloud. This was different. The thieves knew exactly which families were vulnerable. They knew the Hendersons were away in Denver. They knew old Pete Garrison was sick in bed. Someone in this community is a traitor, Jake declared to the shocked town council. Someone is selling us out. The accusation hung in the air like poison. The trust that held their small frontier town together was fracturing. Catherine held Grace close, studying the faces of her neighbors, wondering who could be capable of such a cold-blooded betrayal. Jake, ever the pragmatist, proposed a new strategy, a network of shared intelligence. No single person would know all the patrol schedules or herd locations. They would create a web of information so complex that any leak could be traced back to its source. It was a brilliant, methodical plan. It was also a plan that would bring Jake into town more often. He started finding excuses to visit Dr. Morrison's office, always when he knew Catherine would be there assisting. The pretense of business soon faded, replaced by conversations that grew more personal. He was a man of surprising depth, well-read, thoughtful, with a mind as sharp as a newly honed knife. My mother insisted I get a proper education before coming west, he explained one evening. She said a man needed more than a strong back to build something that lasts. He paused, his green eyes studying her. You speak like someone who's wrestled with difficult choices yourself. The observation was too close to the bone. She felt the urge, overwhelming and terrifying, to tell him everything, to unburden herself, to see if this man of integrity could possibly understand. But she couldn't. The risk was too great. The investigation into the rustlers took a turn when a young ranch hand, Tim Caldwell, recognized one of the thieves during a failed raid, a drifter named Eddie Morse. Finally, they had a name, a face, a lead. Jake led a posse to an abandoned mining shack in the foothills. What they found there was worse than anyone had imagined. It was the headquarters of a massive rustling operation. There were maps, schedules, and a ledger detailing every payment made to their local informant. When Jake returned, he stood before the entire town, the captured book in his hand. The silence in the church was absolute. He read the name. It wasn't a drifter. It wasn't some disgruntled cowboy. It was someone at the very heart of their community, someone they all trusted. Beatrice Fletcher, Jake's voice rang out, and her husband, Marcus. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The Fletchers, the kind, smiling couple who ran the general store, the woman who had organized the collection for Grace's baby clothes. They had sold out their friends and neighbors, every confidence, every piece of gossip, for $800 in blood money. By the time the posse got to the store, it was empty. The Fletchers were gone, vanished into the night with their money and their betrayal. The revelation tore Copper Ridge apart. The trust was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. Catherine felt a selfish wave of relief. Her secret was still safe. But the incident was a stark reminder of how fragile her new life was. One wrong move, one person digging too deep, and it would all come crashing down. Jake, in the midst of the chaos, was their rock. He organized, he led, he donated his own money to help the families who had been ruined. And his visits to Catherine became even more frequent, his intentions more clear. I know it's soon, he said one evening, as she rocked Grace by the firelight, but I'm falling in love with you, Catherine. I want you to be my wife. The words were everything she'd ever wanted to hear. A good man, a home, a father for her daughter, a future. But it was all based on a lie. His proposal was followed by another complication. Dr. Morrison announced a new territorial program to officially certify medical practitioners. It was a chance for Catherine to get the recognition she deserved. But it required documentation, a birth certificate, a marriage certificate, proof of medical training. She had none of it, not a single piece of paper that wouldn't expose her. The walls were closing in. Jake's love, the doctor's offer, her own desire for a real life. It was all forcing her toward a truth she couldn't bear to tell. The final piece of the trap was sprung during a conversation about Grace's baptism. You'll need documentation, of course, Jake said casually. Proof of your marriage to... What was your husband's name again? In all our talks, you've never said his name. The question hung in the air. A simple question she had no answer for. In all her planning, all her careful deceptions, she had never given her fictional husband a full name. Her mind went blank. She panicked. James, she stammered, grabbing the first name that came to her. Then for a surname, her eyes darted around the room and landed on the doctor's sign. James Morrison. Jake's sharp intake of breath was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Morrison, like the doctor. I've known Samuel Morrison for 5 years. He's always said he was the last of his line. The lie had collapsed. The entire fragile structure of her new identity had just shattered. Jake was looking at her, his eyes full of a dawning, terrible suspicion. And Catherine knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the life she had built in Copper Ridge was over. The truth was coming for her, and it was coming now. The silence in the small room was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Jake's eyes, usually so warm, were now filled with a sharp, calculating light. He was piecing it together, and she could see the moment the pieces clicked into a picture she had desperately tried to hide. A distant relation, she said, her voice thin, the lie tasting like poison. Perhaps the doctor doesn't speak of it. Perhaps, Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked from her to Grace, who was sleeping in her cradle. His gaze lingered on the baby's face, and a new, startling thought seemed to cross his mind. She's beautiful, but there's something familiar about her. I can't place it. Catherine's blood ran cold. He was seeing Miguel. He was seeing the ghost of a Spanish priest in the face of her child. The conversation was mercifully cut short by Dr. Morrison's return, but the damage was done. Jake left abruptly, the easy warmth between them replaced by a chasm of suspicion. Catherine knew she was out of time. Her lies were unraveling faster than she could patch them. Every day brought her closer to exposure, and the thought of the shame it would bring upon Grace was a physical pain. She had to do something. But what? Run again? Disappear into the wilderness and start over with a new set of lies? The answer arrived in an envelope, delivered by a traveling merchant. The seal was from St. Magdalene's Convent. Her hands shook as she opened it. It was from Mother Superior Agatha. But it wasn't an accusation. It was a question. Father Miguel Santos had disappeared from the convent just weeks after Catherine had left. He'd vanished, leaving only a note about a crisis of faith. The church was investigating, and they were writing to anyone who had known him well. You may have insights into his spiritual struggles, the letter read. Any information would be received with gratitude and kept in strict confidence. The world tilted on its axis. Miguel hadn't accepted her decision. He hadn't stayed to protect his calling. He had thrown it all away. He was out there somewhere, looking for her. And he was carrying the truth with him like a lit torch, ready to set her new world on fire. Her sacrifice had been for nothing. The fear was a living thing inside her, clawing at her throat. He would find her. In the small, interconnected world of the frontier, a persistent man asking questions about a runaway nun would eventually be pointed toward Copper Ridge. It was only a matter of time. Her life was now a race against his arrival. Every knock on the door, every new face in town, sent a jolt of terror through her. Jake's marriage proposal now hung between them, an impossible dream. How could she say yes? How could she bind this good, honest man to a life built on deceit, a life that could explode into scandal at any moment? She was trapped by her past, trapped by her lies, and trapped by a love she couldn't dare to accept. Then one evening, Jake rode up to the shop. There was no easy smile, no casual greeting. His face was set like stone. He had come for an answer, not about marriage, about everything. We need to talk, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. She let him in, her heart hammering against her ribs. He didn't sit down. I had a visitor today, Catherine, he said, his green eyes boring into hers. A man asking questions. A priest. His name was Father Miguel Santos. It was over. The race was lost. Miguel was here. The world she had so carefully constructed had just been reduced to rubble. I don't know that name, she whispered, the lie flimsy and pathetic. He described a woman with dark hair, medical training, traveling alone. He said he was desperately worried about her. I told him I'd never seen anyone like that, Jake said, his voice flat. I sent him on his way, toward Denver. She stared at him, stunned. Why? Because, Jake said, taking a step closer, his voice dropping. I wanted to hear the truth from you, because for months I've been watching you. I've seen you deliver a baby in a blizzard. I've seen you save grown men from dying. I've seen your courage and your kindness. And none of it matches the story you've been telling. So now you're going to tell me the real one. All of it. Starting with who exactly is the father of your child? The question was a blade, stripping away her last defense. He knew. He might not have all the pieces, but he knew the core of it was a lie. This was it, the moment of reckoning. She could keep lying, or she could trust this man with the truth that could destroy her. She looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully, and she looked at Jake, his face a mask of grim determination, waiting. And she began to speak. The story spilled out of her, a torrent of shame and fear held back for too long. The convent, the forbidden love with Miguel, the pregnancy, the desperate flight, the creation of the widow Catherine Donnelly to protect her unborn child. She told him everything, her voice barely a whisper, expecting to see disgust and anger dawn on his face. When she finished, the silence was deafening. Jake walked to the window, his back to her, looking out at the darkening town. She watched the rigid line of his shoulders, her fate resting in the hands of this man she had so thoroughly deceived. Finally he turned. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. The person I've come to know, he said slowly, is a woman who faced down a storm to save a child, a woman who works tirelessly to heal the sick, a woman who loves her daughter more than life itself. Those things aren't lies, Catherine. The person you are here, in Copper Ridge, is real. But Grace, she choked out, she's another man's child, a priest's child. Grace is an innocent who deserves a father who will protect her, Jake said, his voice firm. He knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. Your past doesn't matter to me. The choices you made to survive, to protect her, they only make me admire you more. She stared at him, unable to comprehend his words. This was not the condemnation she had braced herself for. This was grace. But Miguel, he's still out there. He'll come back. Then we'll face him when he does, Jake said. But his claim is on the woman you were. My claim is on the woman you are. I'm asking you again, Catherine Marie Donnelly. Your real name. Your real self. Will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Grace? Will you let us build a life together based on the truth right here, starting now? Before she could answer, before she could even process the impossible hope blooming in her chest, the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs made them both freeze. The door flew open. It was Miguel. His face was gaunt, his eyes burning with a zealot's fire. He wasn't the gentle scholar she remembered. This was a man pushed past his limits, a man who had sacrificed his soul for a single purpose, to find her. His eyes found Catherine, then Jake kneeling at her side, holding her hands. Then his gaze fell upon the cradle. He stepped forward, a look of pure, agonizing love on his face as he saw his daughter for the first time. Catherine, he breathed, his voice cracking. I've found you. He looked at Jake, his expression hardening into one of pure hatred. Get away from her. She is mine. That child is mine. We have a life to build together. Jake rose slowly, placing himself between Miguel and Catherine. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was a wall of solid rock. The life Catherine had with you is over, Jake said, his voice level but carrying the cold weight of steel. She's made a new one here, with me. She made vows, that Miguel spat, his composure breaking. To God and to me, in her heart. She made a choice to protect her child, Jake countered, a choice you should have helped her with instead of abandoning your post to chase her across the country. You're not thinking of her, you're thinking of yourself. Miguel lunged, not at Jake, but toward the cradle. She is my daughter. Jake moved faster than Catherine thought possible, blocking his path. The two men stood face to face, a priest who had lost his faith and a rancher who had found it, ready to fight for the future of a woman and a child caught between them. But the real threat wasn't in the room. A sudden commotion from the street below drew their attention. Shouts, the sound of running feet. Then a single clear voice yelling a name that made Catherine's blood freeze. "It's Whitman! He's got Abigail!" Mr. Whitman, the powerful rancher, the man whose word was law. What did he want with her sister? Jake's head snapped toward the window. His face, which had been calm and resolute, was suddenly a mask of dawning horror. He looked at Catherine, and in his eyes she saw a new, terrible secret. "The rustlers," Jake said, his voice a strained whisper. "The ledger we found on Eddie Morse. It wasn't complete. The Fletchers weren't the masterminds. They were just pawns. They were working for someone much bigger, someone who wanted to control this entire territory." Catherine's mind reeled. "Whitman? He's been systematically bankrupting the smaller ranchers," Jake said, the pieces falling into place with sickening speed, "using the rustlers to weaken them so he can buy up their land for pennies on the dollar. He wants it all." "But Abigail, why would he take her?" And then she knew. The way Abigail had been so nervous, so eager for Catherine to find work. The way she spoke of the Whitmans with that strange mix of awe and fear. "She knew," Catherine breathed. "Abigail knew what he was doing. She must have been involved." Jake's face was grim. Or she found out and was going to expose him. A gunshot echoed from the street, followed by a woman's scream. It was Abigail. Miguel stood frozen, the personal battle for his family forgotten in the face of a greater, more immediate danger. Jake turned to Catherine, his eyes locking with hers. The choice was gone. The future was no longer a quiet life on a ranch. It was here now in the middle of a dusty street with her sister's life on the line. "Stay here, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone," Jake commanded, already moving toward the stairs, his hand on the gun at his hip. But Catherine was already grabbing Grace from the cradle. She looked at Miguel, whose face was a canvas of confusion and fear. "The man who sent you away from Boston?" she said, a cold, forgotten memory suddenly surfacing. "The man who framed our father, his business partner. What was his name, Miguel? You were there. You heard the whispers." Miguel's eyes widened in dawning, sickening recognition. Whitman. His name was Harrison Whitman. It wasn't a coincidence. None of it was. Whitman hadn't just framed her father. He had followed the remnants of her family here, to this remote town, to finish what he had started. This wasn't just about land. This was about destroying the Donnelly name, root and stem. Her sister wasn't just a hostage. She was the final piece in a decade-long plan for revenge. Jake was already gone. Catherine looked at Miguel, the father of her child. "He's going to kill them both," she said. "He's going to kill my sister, and he's going to kill the man I love." She handed Grace to Miguel. His arms came up automatically to take his daughter. "Protect her," Catherine commanded, her voice no longer that of a nun or a frightened widow. It was the voice of a woman with nothing left to lose. "Your fight is no longer with Jake. It's with him." And with that, she turned and ran down the stairs, out into the chaos of the street, toward the gunshot, toward the man who had destroyed her family once and was about to do it again. The final secret of Copper Ridge was out, and it would be paid for in blood. The main street of Copper Ridge was a scene of chaos. Townspeople scattered for cover as Harrison Whitman stood in the dust, a smoking pistol in one hand, and Abigail clutched to his chest with the other, her face a mask of terror. Two of his ranch hands stood with him, rifles leveled, keeping the crowd at bay. "This is a private matter," Whitman bellowed, his face red with rage and whiskey. "This is between me and the last of the thieving Donnellys." Jake was crouched behind a water trough, his own pistol drawn, trying to get a clear shot. He saw Catherine emerge from the shop, and his heart stopped. "Catherine, get back inside," he yelled, but she didn't listen. She walked forward into the open, her hands raised. "Let her go, Whitman. Your fight is with me." Whitman laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "So the little nun finally shows her face. I wondered when you'd piece it together. Your father was a fool, he trusted me. And your sister here, she was even more foolish. She came to me, begging for money to cover her gambling debts, offering information in exchange. She told me you were coming. She helped me set the trap." Catherine stared at Abigail, whose eyes were filled with tears of shame. The betrayal was a physical blow, sharper than any knife. Her own sister had sold her out. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Abigail sobbed. "He promised no one would get hurt." "Promises are for fools and children," Whitman snarled, pressing the gun to Abigail's temple. "Now I have you both. The end of the line." Suddenly, a new figure stepped out from the alley beside the general store. It was Miguel. He held Grace in one arm, wrapped tightly in a blanket. In his other hand, he held the heavy silver cross from Catherine's bundle. "Let them go," Miguel said, his voice ringing with an authority Catherine hadn't heard since his sermons. It was the voice of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. Whitman's eyes widened in confusion. "Who the hell are you?" "I am the man whose life you and your kind destroy," Miguel said. "I am a priest who has seen the devil, and he looks just like you." The distraction was all Jake needed. He fired. Not at Whitman, but at the rifleman to his left. The man crumpled to the ground. In the same instant, Reverend Ashford, a man of God who had seen enough evil for one day, emerged from the church with an old hunting rifle and took down the second guard. Whitman, panicked, shoved Abigail to the ground and turned his pistol on Catherine. "You first, nun!" But Miguel was already moving. With a roar of pure primal fury, he charged forward. He threw himself at Whitman, not with his fists, but with the heavy silver cross, swinging it like a weapon. The crucifix, a symbol of mercy, became an instrument of brutal, desperate justice. It struck Whitman's gun hand, sending the pistol flying into the dust. Jake was on him in a flash, the fight dissolving into a brawl of fists and curses. But Whitman was a big man, fueled by rage. He threw Jake off and scrambled for the fallen pistol. He never made it. Abigail, sobbing on the ground, saw her chance. Her brother-in-law-to-be was in mortal danger. Her sister was about to be a widow before she was even a bride. She grabbed a heavy piece of firewood from a nearby stack and swung it with all the force of her guilt and terror. It connected with the back of Whitman's head with a sickening crack. He collapsed unconscious. Silence fell on the street. It was over. Abigail scrambled to her feet, rushing to Catherine, her words a torrent of apology. "I'm so sorry, Cat. I was in so deep. He threatened me. I never wanted this." Catherine looked at her sister, the woman who had betrayed her, and then at Jake, who was getting to his feet, bruised but alive. She looked at Miguel, standing over Whitman's body, his chest heaving, holding their daughter who, miraculously, had slept through the entire ordeal. In that moment, she felt no anger, only a profound, weary sadness for the broken lives that littered the dusty street. 6 months later, Catherine Marie Donnelly stood in the Copper Ridge Church, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was getting married. Jake Thornfield stood beside her, his hand holding hers, his green eyes full of a love that was steady and true. Grace, now a toddler, stumbled down the aisle as their flower girl, her laughter echoing in the small church. The town had healed. With Whitman exposed and arrested by the territorial marshals, the cloud of fear and suspicion lifted. The ranches he had stolen were returned to their rightful owners. Copper Ridge was once again a community built on trust. Abigail, facing the consequences of her actions, had worked to earn back that trust. She confessed everything to the town council and spent the next year working off her debts, her humility and hard work slowly mending the bridges she had burned. And Miguel. After the fight, he had handed Grace back to Catherine. "She has 2 good parents here," he'd said, his eyes filled with a sad peace. "She doesn't need a third who is lost." He had blessed them both, a priest once more in his heart, and had ridden west, toward California, seeking a new way to serve a God he was just beginning to understand again. He wrote sometimes, letters filled with news of a school he'd started for orphan children, his love for Grace expressed in every line. He would always be her father, but he had accepted that his place was not in her life, but in her story. As Catherine stood with Jake on the porch of their ranch house, watching Grace chase butterflies in the setting sun, she felt a peace she had never thought possible. Her life was not the one she had planned. It was messy, complicated, and built on the ruins of a dozen secrets. But it was real, and it was hers. She had run from a scandal only to find a conspiracy. She had fled a broken vow only to find a true love. She had sought a place to hide and instead had found a place to stand, a place to fight, a place to call home. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer had power over her. She was not Sister Catherine, the fallen nun, nor Catherine Donnelly, the frightened widow. She was Catherine Thornfield, a wife, a mother, a survivor, and for the first time in her life, she was truly free. If you enjoyed this story of survival and redemption, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on because we have countless more tales of the unexpected waiting for you. Check out the 2 videos on your screen right now for another journey into the unknown. We'll see you there.